Okay, let's get started. Generalizable active privacy choice, designing a graphical user interface for global privacy control. A lot of words. Let's tackle those, individually. Let's do it in 2 steps. Designing a graphical user interface for global privacy control. Okay, let's start there. And I think I'm the 100th person today showing that we have a problem with this, with these opt-out screens, right? People go to websites, and now I need to check for every individual website what I want to do about these necessary cookies and the functional ones, and so on and so forth, right? That's just not workable. And so, if you want to have a big topic of this talk, what is it about? We can't reshuffle the deck chairs on the Titanic, right? We need a more fundamental solution. We need to put privacy rights into the structure of the internet. And so that is what this is about. And so we want to design a graphical user interface for global privacy control. Maybe a show of hands, global privacy control. Who's heard about global privacy control? Okay, that's a good number, great. So for those who don't, let me briefly say what it is. My collaborator, Aram Zohar from the Washington Post, explains it that way. We want to have a little robot who, when I go to a website, tells the website, opt me out, right? And the robot can do this either when I want to do it for one individual site or for all sites that I visit. And that's up to me. I can program that little robot. And so that is, what global privacy control is about. And there are different implementations. I just show you one. For example, here on Firefox, we have in the settings page, tell websites not to sell or share my data. That is the GPC setting. You can turn that on. And as you've seen here, this is not turned on by default. If I install Firefox out of the box, this is not checked, right? And so you would need to, do that yourself. That is important, and I will get to that in the second element of this talk here. Maybe one other question for you. There's also do not track, right? You've seen the other setting. Why do we need GPC? What's the reason to actually have both of these settings? They seem to be doing the same thing, right? I don't know, does anybody want to give it a try? Yeah?
Legally, they're different.
Legally, they're different. Excellent. Yeah, that's a very good point. And how are they different? Well, GPC is required by law. So as we can see here, this was the first, where some regulator actually said, yeah, if you receive a GPC signal, then you have to change your cookie settings. This was at the time called regulation by tweet. So the Attorney General said, all right, websites, if you are in California and you receive a GPC signal, you guys need to change your cookies and everything else. And you need to propagate that system, propagate that signal through the system, right? Since then, there was an enforcement action against Sephora who did not do that and received a fine here under California law. And now GPC is also available in Colorado. It is here in the short list for privacy preference signals that need to be respected in Colorado. And you can see it is indeed a very short list with one entry, which is GPC. There might be others, but GPC is required. I'm also hopeful that other regulators in the US, and who knows, maybe also even in Europe, will say, all right, you need to respect GPC. To give you a sense, If you, as a user, want to use gPC, you can use Brave, you can use Firefox, you can use browser extension. I recommend OptMeOut. Done by my students, it's perfect. So, you know, check it out, try it. Here are the websites, some of them that respect that. And then we heard about the consent management platforms, right? So they're very important, and they also integrate gPC. And the way they do it is that, okay, if a site receives a gPC signal, then you need to change your cookies, you need to change your other website settings so that you don't disclose people's information. Okay, so this is the gPC part. Now we want to create a user interface for gPC. The problem that we have is the default problem. As I showed you in Firefox, gPC is not turned on by default. Right? A user has to go there and check it. And if somebody makes an implementation individually side by side, right, then the problem becomes, all right, we have the same cookie banner plight, you know, the same problem that we go side by side. So we want to be smart about it, right? And we want to have actually user interface that requires people to make a choice, but is not annoying. So these are the two requirements, right? We cannot have a default setting, so people must make a choice, but that choice must not be annoying. And so we have a usability problem, and the way to address this here is activity plus generalizability. And so here's one example. You go to one site, make your gPC choice, you say, all right, this choice that I just made, apply it to all other future sites that I visit. Right? That's a simple example of how you generalized your choice from one site to another. And so what we did in this work here is we came up with different, what we call privacy choice schemes. This one that I just showed you is just one. There can be many. This is the one I showed you. You're seeing a banner. If you go to one site, apply my choices to other sites. This is another option. You go by category. You just show users when they set up their browser, for example, all right, this is what gPC does. Do you want to apply it to categories of sites that have advertising, analytics, you know, whatever it is that you select here? That's a different scheme, and it's a different way of generalizability. And so we need activity, generalizability, and what we did here was demonstrate that in the context of gPC, but you can also apply the same ideas to cookie banners, to really everything where users need to make a choice. I want to present you one result, which is that people are, in fact, less annoyed if they can generalize their choices. So that is, you know, what this is showing here. And so at the bottom here, you see a baseline. And, you know, initially I was actually worried that, okay, if we do a study and we ask users, all right, browse for 1 week, and every time you open a new website, we're going to inject a banner and you have to click, people would say, all right, I quit this study, I give up. I don't want, you know, any money, I just want out of here. But people were actually quite tolerant, and, you know, nobody dropped out. But certainly more people were annoyed by that than if they could generalize their choices, which, for example, here in this S4 website scheme, right, 98% of the participants agreed or strongly agreed, yes, I was not disrupted in my browsing when I had this generalizability scheme available. And so our main findings are generalizability features slightly decrease the opt-out utility. Yes, it cannot be as fine-grained, right? That's the nature of generalizability. But it increases opt-out efficiency substantially. It's better usable. It makes opting out less disruptive, and that is actually what matters most to people. They want to attend to a certain primary task, visiting a website, you know, booking their flights to Bristol, other things, right? They don't want to make constantly privacy choices. Different, you know, maybe I should say it, different than from all of us, you know, people don't want to do privacy. They don't go on the internet to do privacy, right? They do something else. And so that was very important to study participants. Regulators should require publishers to honor GPC signals. We are working on that. Browser vendors should integrate GPC in their browsers via Generalizable Active Privacy Choice interface. And publishers should honor opt-outs via GPC. Thank you very much. I can show my team here that I had the pleasure working with Eliza Koller, Chanyu Ma, Bella Tassone, and Joe Champeau. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you for the interesting talk. Yeah, we have a question there.
Thank you, Sebastian, for the great work and for your efforts for advocating for GPC. My question is, so I guess I understand why there should not be default. I mean, that reminds me, of the do not track and then the Adobe, going crazy about it. What if regulation requires browser vendors to ask the question? Do you think it's a sensible choice?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I mean, it might be actually here, like in the US, right, it's an opt-out regime, right? And that's really the reason why it cannot be. I would also question, why is the US an opt-out regime? That's just assumed, but I actually would want to look more into that. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think a law could say, yeah, there's no reason for not turning it on by default. If that's what a local law says. I would say yes. In the US, the thinking is more, yeah, if you use a browser and it has GPC enabled, then you actually did not know about it, or we cannot assume that you knew about it, right? And that's why it is not a legally relevant statement that you're making, right? Although, and my collaborator Pete Snyder from Brave actually reminded me of that, right? That if you use a privacy-preserving product, you could say that was my choice, right? By selecting a certain privacy-preserving product, I have demonstrated that I want the most privacy that I can get, and so the browser can turn on GPC by default. And that's actually also what Mozilla is doing with Firefox if you use it in anonymous mode. They turn it on by default. Yeah, but excellent point.
Thank you for your talk. So I'm curious about the role of the consent management providers in this. You have managed this in the very beginning of your talk. So you said when the GPC is sent, then the consent management providers are taking the signal. I was curious to understand what they do with that signal. How does it translate to the kind of the consent stream, right? Or to the actual behavior of the websites?
Yeah, that's excellent. I think, first of all, consent management platforms, they're actually motivated to integrate GPC because that's an additional feature they have. And so when now somebody sends a GPC signal, the CMP will pick it up. And you can, for example, I know it for OneTrust, but I'm sure it's true for other consent management platforms. Now, you can make in your OneTrust dashboard a setting. When my site receives a GPC signal, then change the cookie settings for these 10 cookies like that. And so, for example, what that means is that there are, like, for example, Google has restricted data processing, right? And so you can say, when you receive a GPC signal, turn on Google restricted data processing so that fewer data items are received and propagated downstream to ad networks. Or, as you said, change the consent string, right? The IAB consent string to opt out. And then that is propagated through the entire ad ecosystem. So there are ways that the CMP allows you to set this. You don't have to implement that all yourself.
I think that's the time we had for questions. Let's thank our speaker and move to the last talk.